In the shadowed corridors of Capitol Hill, two fierce women, Jasmine Crockett and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, stand on the edge of a storm that threatens to unravel everything. Over 700 leaked emails, hidden deals with powerful tech giants, and whispered alliances have shattered the fragile trust they once shared with the people they vowed to serve. As the walls close in, their battle transcends politics. This is a fight for the soul of a nation, for the very idea of justice itself. Emotions flare, loyalties fracture, and the stakes rise with every secret unveiled. In a world where every word is weaponized and every move watched, who can truly claim the moral high ground? As the spotlight intensifies, the line between hero and pawn blurs, and one question remains. Will truth set them free or destroy them both? This is not just a story of power. It's a relentless clash of ideals, where the consequences will echo far beyond these halls. And as the drama ignites, we step quietly into the first chapter of a battle that will define a generation. The year is 2025. America is no longer the political monolith it once was. In the aftermath of the Democratic Party's devastating loss of the Senate in the 2024 midterms, chaos and infighting have cracked the party from within. The facade of unity has crumbled into 1,000 sharp-edged fragments, each cutting a different direction. From the coast to the heartland, a toxic disillusionment hangs in the air like smog. Thick, suffocating, unavoidable. Progressive youth, once the fiery backbone of grassroots energy, now feel betrayed by what they call half measures and hollow promises. They chant not in hope, but in defiance. Meanwhile, the working-class Black and Latino communities, who gave Democrats their margin of victory time and time again, feel like discarded footnotes in speeches written for Wall Street donors. The old message of "we're fighting for you" sounds more like a punchline than a promise. At the center of the storm stands Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the face of the Green Vanguard, a movement as loud as it is idealistic. With her signature red lipstick and razor-sharp rhetoric, she dominates every screen, every feed, every protest. She commands stages like a general on the eve of war, calling for climate revolution, worker ownership, and punitive wealth taxes. To her supporters, she is a prophet. To her enemies, a dangerous radical. But her critics within the party, and even some former allies, whisper that her crusade has drifted from the people to the platforms, from justice to performance. They accuse her of making deals in backrooms while preaching revolution from podiums. In sharp contrast stands Jasmine Crockett, the unshakable congresswoman from Texas, a former public defender who made her name not on Twitter, but in courtrooms where no cameras rolled. Charismatic yet calculated, she refuses to wrap her fight for justice in flowery slogans. She speaks plainly, like someone who has held the hands of families ruined by a broken legal system. Her platform, Practical Justice, isn't designed to go viral. It's designed to get signatures on legislation. She doesn't believe in burning the system down. She believes in breaking it open, with strategy, not spectacle. And while AOC rallies millions in Times Square, Crockett walks the blood-soaked hallways of prisons and police departments demanding answers. The tension between them was never just ideological. It was personal. In caucus meetings, AOC dismisses Crockett's efforts as incrementalism dressed in compromise. Crockett, unshaken, fires back that revolution means nothing if it doesn't survive contact with reality. Their Cold War is fought in glances, in veiled remarks at press conferences, in silence when applause should have been shared. The press catches wind and spins a new narrative, the battle for the soul of the left, and it sells. Their rivalry becomes a spectacle, a sideshow. But to those in the trenches, it's a war of survival. But beneath the headlines, something darker brews. The streets of cities like Detroit, Houston, and Philadelphia are boiling with unrest. Community leaders say federal promises haven't reached them in years. Affordable housing remains a fantasy, police violence is still routine, and climate initiatives mean nothing when the water in your taps is poisoned. Protest signs read, "We voted." They vanished. These aren't Republican strongholds. These are Democratic strongholds, now erupting like volcanoes long ignored. And in the middle of that firestorm, Both women rise, but only one is seen as real by the people on the ground. Jasmine Crockett is haunted not just by injustice, but by the silence from within her own party. She walks into committee rooms filled with suits that speak in data while she carries names, lives, and funeral dates in her briefcase. When she speaks, eyes roll. When AOC speaks, the cameras turn. It's not just unfair, it's an insult. Crockett doesn't want glory, she wants laws. She wants change etched into federal code, not etched into tweet history. But every time she introduces a bill on police demilitarization or sentencing reform, it's met with procedural death. Meanwhile, AOC's sweeping green initiatives, however unfunded, make front-page headlines. Still, Crockett won't break. She sharpens her voice, builds coalitions in silence, and files legislation with a fury that is never broadcast but never ceases. She knows she is underestimated, and she uses it. "Let them look past me," she once said in a leaked voice note. "I'll be behind them when the walls cave in." Her district in Texas, plagued by injustice and neglect, begins to rally. Local organizers say she shows up, rain or bullets. Her favorability climbs, quietly, steadily, dangerous. Meanwhile, AOC doubles down on national visibility. Climate summits in Europe, panels with celebrities, viral speeches on the House floor that garner millions of views and, somehow, very few votes. Her supporters chant, "Reclaim the future." But behind the slogans are whispers of disconnection. Critics ask why she hasn't visited the Bronx in months, why union workers say her team hasn't returned their calls, why her latest campaign funders include corporate climate startups with interests that don't quite align with her fiery rhetoric. By early summer, the pressure reaches boiling point. A new policy package, the Green New Deal 2.0, is set to be introduced, and the media dubs it AOC's legacy-defining moment. But Crockett isn't clapping. She reads the fine print and finds buried language gutting justice reinvestment funds. Programs for formerly incarcerated youth, erased. Protections for Black-owned businesses, slashed. When she raises concerns, she's told it's a sacrifice for the bigger vision. The words land like gunfire. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she sends a forward message to her closest allies, one that would mark the beginning of the end. Time to break silence. And with that, the battle lines are drawn, not between left and right, but between fire and steel, between dreams and deliverables, between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jasmine Crockett. And this time, the cameras won't be able to look away. The mahogany-paneled war room of the Democratic National Committee in D.C. was meant to be a place of strategy and unity. Instead, it had become a political battleground where whispered agendas collided under chandeliers and marble columns. The media never saw the clenched jaws, the broken pens, or the glances that could cut glass. Inside those closed doors, where cell phones were confiscated and every word hung with consequence, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez often stood with arms folded and eyes ablaze, slicing through committee drafts like a surgeon with something to prove. "This bill," she'd declare, her voice echoing through the sterile room, "is a polished coffin for real reform. It's compromise dressed in corpse makeup." The room would go still. She wasn't just criticizing policy. She was accusing her own party of betrayal, and everyone knew exactly who she was aiming at. Jasmine Crockett sat 2 seats away, back straight, eyes forward. The calm before a hurricane. She waited, always waited. Then with a deliberate breath, she spoke. Low but thunderous. "It's easy to attack a bill when your district's drowning in latte shops. Mine's drowning in bullets." Her voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room did. "You quote Marx in meetings. I quote mothers who bury teenagers." The clash wasn't just philosophical, it was visceral. AOC talked revolution. Crockett talked morgues. Every time AOC mocked incrementalism, she erased the lives Crockett fought for. Lives who didn't need a utopia, just clean water and one more week without a funeral. The tension infected everything. Votes, endorsements, even hallway greetings. Staffers started avoiding eye contact during joint events. Allies became cautious. The Young Progressives Caucus, once a bastion of shared vision, began to split like a fault line under pressure. Some, intoxicated by AOC's charisma and sweeping visions, clung to the dream of systemic upheaval. Others, hardened by reality and the cost of failed purity tests, quietly drifted toward Crockett's grounded realism. The party leadership saw it but said nothing. They needed both women. One brought fire, the other brought focus. But beneath their silence was fear. Fear that the fight would spill out of the back rooms and into the streets. And then, it did. Leaks began to surface. Voice recordings from private caucus meetings. Emails filled with passive-aggressive jabs and committee sabotage. One memo circulated on political blogs included AOC's handwritten margin note next to a Crockett-sponsored policing bill. Lipstick on a lynch rope. The backlash was immediate and explosive. AOC's defenders called it metaphor, others called it monstrous. Crockett, usually composed, stepped to the podium that night in Dallas with fire in her veins and fire in her voice. We don't need permission from Harvard to fix the South Side. We don't need slogans. We need protection. Her words didn't just strike, they detonated. Cable news seized the spectacle. The New York Times ran a headline the next day. One party, two realities. The battle for the left's future. MSNBC dubbed them the Democratic Amazons, while Fox News delighted in the chaos. They want to burn the house down, one commentator smirked. Only difference is one brought a flamethrower. The other brought the blueprint. Crockett hated the circus, but she couldn't ignore the spotlight anymore, because in the shadows her policies were being drowned by louder voices. In quiet neighborhoods riddled with crime and systemic neglect, her constituents didn't watch viral speeches. They watched their backs. And when her bills to increase community-based intervention programs were stripped down to meaningless gestures, she knew this wasn't just politics anymore. It was survival. Behind closed doors, the resentment thickened. At one DNC retreat in Maryland, a shouting match erupted during a policy debrief. AOC called Crockett's housing reform timid charity in the face of capitalist rot. Crockett stood, face unreadable, voice steady. You don't get to call my work timid until you've knocked on doors in East Oak Cliff, where children sleep in closets. The room was frozen. No one intervened. These weren't just two women disagreeing. This was a tectonic shift in the power structure. One represented thunder, the other, pressure. Both unstoppable, both incompatible. Yet the greatest injustice was how Crockett's warnings were dismissed. Too local, they said. Too narrow. But she knew those were just euphemisms for too black, too poor, too inconvenient. Every concession made to AOC's grand green visions came at the cost of programs for neighborhoods like hers. And every time she fought back, she was painted as the antagonist, the one holding the movement back. It was gaslighting at a national scale, and it fueled her resolve. When a Politico feature ran with the headline, "Two women, one future, the left can only choose one," Crockett didn't flinch. She simply whispered to her chief of staff, "Let them choose. I'll still be here when the hashtags fade." That night, she drafted a speech that would later be called the most pivotal of her career, a declaration not just of policy, but of war. The Democratic Party was no longer a house divided. It was a house on fire, and someone had locked the exits. The CNN studio lights were blinding, but the heat in the room came from something far more volatile than bulbs. It was the first Sunday of September 2026, and State of the Union had never felt more like a battleground. The network billed it as a debate for the future, but by the time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jasmine Crockett sat across from each other, flanked by flags and under the glare of 5 cameras, it was clear this was no mere policy discussion. The Green New Deal 2.0 had fractured the left along deep ideological fault lines, and this was the earthquake. From the moment the host introduced them, the tension was radioactive. Crockett in a steel gray blazer, eyes sharp, and AOC in signature crimson, lips curled into a confident half-smile that barely masked the storm brewing behind her words. The host barely finished the opening question before Crockett leaned into the mic, voice clipped and surgical. Let's be honest, Green New Deal 2.0 isn't green, it's greenwashed. You partnered with EcoForce, an organization propped up by venture capital from tech billionaires who fly private jets and gut working-class communities to build solar farms. The audience gasped audibly, and Twitter lit up in real time. AOC's smile dropped. She adjusted her microphone like a boxer tightening gloves. "You're grasping," she shot back, "and while you're at it, you might want to disclose your campaign manager's ties to the Texas Oil Diversification Task Force." Crockett's eyes narrowed. The host tried to step in. "Ladies, let's focus on policy." But the gloves were already off. AOC leaned forward, voice rising, righteous fury in every syllable. "This isn't about clean energy or corporate funding. This is about you trying to fracture our base to grease the rails for your Senate run. You don't want justice. You want a bigger office." Crockett didn't blink. "And you don't want change. You want followers. You want to play queen of a collapsing castle built on hashtags and false promises." The studio felt like it was pulsing, seconds from a detonation. The host interjected again. "Congresswoman Crockett, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, please." But neither woman heard him anymore. They were speaking to the nation, but they were firing at each other. The third interruption came when Crockett slammed down a printed EcoForce financial report, its highlighted lines fluttering across the desk. "You want receipts," she said, voice like shattering glass. "Here's your revolution. 48% of EcoForce's funding comes from the same hedge funds that backed the eviction of thousands of families in Chicago during the pandemic." AOC looked at the papers with fury, not surprise. "You're manipulating data to stir outrage. This is fear politics dressed in integrity." The host tried once more to restore order, wiping sweat from his brow as producers gestured frantically off-screen. But the audience was now glued, spellbound by the collision. What made it worse, what made it unbearable, was how the public discourse framed the fallout. Media pundits accused Crockett of derailing progressive unity, even as she was the one demanding transparency. Think pieces titled "Crockett's Crusade, Necessary or Narcissistic?" flooded digital columns within the hour. While AOC was praised for her visionary resilience, Crockett was accused of anger politics, a loaded term that echoed with race, gender, and a centuries-old double standard. It didn't matter that her facts were airtight or that EcoForce's backers had already faced SEC scrutiny. What mattered was who spoke first, who smiled more, and who fit the narrative. Backstage, Crockett sat alone in the green room, elbows on knees, jaw clenched. Her chief of staff approached with a phone buzzing nonstop. "We're trending, but it's split. You've got trolls and truth in equal measure." Crockett exhaled, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "They want a martyr or a monster. I won't be either." Her voice cracked, but her spine didn't. Outside, AOC exited with a line of staffers, head high, makeup flawless, already prepping for the post-show segment. The cameras would follow her. The donors would applaud her. But Jasmine knew something AOC didn't. Movements don't live on slogans. They live on scars. And Crockett had plenty. This wasn't the end of the debate. It was the prologue to a civil war. And the party had no idea what kind of storm was coming next. It hit like a thunderclap at dawn. Just after midnight on a humid Wednesday in October 2026, a shadowy cyber collective known only as Libra uploaded a zip file titled Project Bellwether to a mirrored server chain hosted across encrypted nodes worldwide. The link began quietly circulating on anonymous forums, but within 2 hours the story detonated across social media, dragging Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez into a maelstrom of public fury. Over 700 internal documents, emails, and meeting notes exposed what millions of Americans had long refused to believe. Their progressive icon had dined in private salons with the very titans she railed against in public. J.P. Morgan, Amazon's climate group, top AI venture heads from Silicon Valley, and not just once. Davos, Zurich, Aspen, these weren't ambush encounters. They were scheduled, strategic, and shockingly transactional. Buried inside the leaked files was one document that shook the public to its moral core. It was a signed memorandum, innocuously titled Adaptive Carbon Flex Framework, dated March 2025. In it, AOC's campaign operatives agreed to support a temporary waiver on federal carbon tax regulations for companies in the early AI-powered climate tech sector. In return, those same companies, JP Morgan Climate Innovations, AWS Earthstream, and multiple unnamed tech venture arms, would contribute data infrastructure and predictive modeling tools for AOC's upcoming national strategy rollout. On paper, it was positioned as a partnership for environmental acceleration, but to the millions who had marched under AOC's banner, it reeked of betrayal. She hadn't just shaken hands with corporate America. She had struck a deal that exempted them from the very rules her movement fought to establish. But nowhere was the fallout more viscerally felt than in the streets. In Brooklyn, murals of AOC were defaced overnight. Green paint splattered across her eyes, the word sellout scrawled in jagged letters. At a rally in Atlanta, young climate activists set up a cardboard guillotine labeled accountability. Hashtags like "One Davos deal" and "false progress" trended globally, drowning out every PR counterattack her team could muster. Her supporters weren't just disappointed, they were disillusioned. For years, she had been the voice of the unvoiced. Now she sounded like every other politician who had climbed a ladder built on promises and pulled it up behind her. Crockett, meanwhile, said nothing, publicly. She didn't gloat, didn't tweet, didn't grant interviews. She walked the Capitol halls with the calm of someone who had warned everyone the storm was coming. But behind closed doors, her team scrambled to assess the implications. "Do we move now?" her chief strategist asked. "Do we challenge her leadership position?" Crockett looked out the window, watching a protest unfold on the Senate lawn. Youths holding signs that read, "The system didn't corrupt her. She negotiated with it." She turned and replied, "We don't need to challenge her. She just did it to herself." The injustice, however, wasn't just political, it was personal. Crockett had been labeled divisive, accused of undermining the movement when she questioned AOC's integrity weeks earlier on CNN. She had been told to stay in line, to not tear down other women of color, as if loyalty to identity outweighed loyalty to truth. Now, as receipts surfaced like sharks in bloody water, no apology came. No one stepped up to say she had been right all along. The silence was deafening, the hypocrisy suffocating. By Friday, AOC's team held a crisis press conference. She stood behind a podium, her usual fire dimmed, reading from prepared remarks. "I made a strategic misjudgment in pursuit of accelerated environmental justice," she said, avoiding the word deal. Cameras clicked. Protesters screamed outside. The damage was done. Trust once broken doesn't rebuild, it scars. In the darkest corners of Washington, operatives from both parties whispered, "It's over." She's vulnerable now. But what none of them realized was that the scandal hadn't just taken down a politician, it had exposed a wound within the soul of the progressive movement itself. A wound that Jasmine Crockett would either cauterize or weaponize. The sun hadn't fully risen over Washington when Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the steps of the Rayburn House office building, flanked by two aides in a growing storm of flashing cameras. She wore no dramatic colors, no political theater, just a charcoal gray suit and steel in her eyes. The moment was calculated, but the words she was about to say cut through the Capitol like lightning through fog. "This is not about politics," she began, her voice steady, amplified by a cluster of microphones that seemed to lean in with anticipation. "This is about betrayal, not just of policy or principle, but of the very people who trusted us to fight for them, not profit from them." A sharp pause, then the sentence that would headline every outlet by noon. "I am calling on the House Ethics Committee to open an immediate investigation into Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's alleged coordination with private corporate interests. We owe that to the public." The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted overlapping questions, some incredulous, some vindicated. Crockett held her ground like a veteran in a courtroom, her stare piercing straight through the lenses aimed at her. "Let me be clear," she said, raising a hand. "I am not here to gloat. I did not come to D.C. to climb over someone else's fall, but I will not stay silent when justice is mocked, not even when the betrayal comes from someone we once called a symbol of change." Behind her, her team watched in silent awe, realizing that the tide was turning. This wasn't a calculated coup. It was the unleashing of a truth they had all felt in the quiet corridors of power, but never dared to voice. The press conference lasted only 8 minutes, but its impact echoed like an aftershock. By noon, cable channels ran split screens of AOC's trembling apology and Crockett's unwavering stare. Political analysts dissected her words like legal testimony. Was this a grab for power or a stand for principle? Twitter was ablaze. Crockett truth trended second only to Dash AO cliques. Op-eds flooded in. One from The Atlantic read, "In an era of silence, Crockett chose to speak. The question now is whether the party will listen." Meanwhile, inside Democratic leadership, tremors of panic began to spread. By the end of the day, 5 junior House members, all previously allied with AOC, released coordinated statements expressing deep concern over the revelations and their full support for an ethics review. One of them, Congresswoman Liana Park of California, appeared on MSNBC that evening and said bluntly, "I love what AOC stood for, but movements are not immune to corruption. If we ignore this, we become what we fought to change." Another, Representative Hugo Martinez from Nevada, added, "If Crockett hadn't said it, we all would have been complicit by silence." Crockett's own staff was flooded with emails, some praising her courage, others warning her to watch her back. Lobbyists went quiet. Donors stayed cautious. But among the grassroots, something was changing. Small-dollar donations surged overnight. Her campaign site crashed twice. On Reddit, young Black organizers posted, "She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She did what needed to be done." Some called her the anti-token, a woman of color who refused to play the expected role of blind solidarity when confronted with moral compromise. For the first time, the narrative wasn't about just one rising star. It was about a reckoning. Still, the backlash came, sharp and swift. Progressive loyalists accused Crockett of dividing the movement. "This is what the right wants," one tweet read, "a woman of color turning on another woman of color in public." Others hinted she was exploiting the scandal to build a platform for a Senate run in Texas, a charge her team denied but didn't directly address. Even some major publications, while praising her candor, questioned the timing. But Crockett never wavered. In a private meeting with her team that night, she said, "Let them question my motives. What matters is my actions, and I'd rather be hated for standing up than loved for staying silent." She knew what she'd triggered wasn't just an ethics investigation. It was an ideological rupture. The progressive wing had long survived on unity, not scrutiny. But unity built on blind faith is brittle. Crockett had struck a nerve deeper than loyalty. She had touched the root of hypocrisy. The next morning, her office phone rang before 7 a.m. It was a senior Democrat, one who hadn't returned her calls in months. "We need to talk," they said. "Off the record." She hung up, smiled faintly, and turned to her aide. "Now they believe I'm serious." The Democratic Party was unraveling before the eyes of the nation, its internal fault lines exposed like fresh wounds bleeding into the public arena. The once unified progressive wing, a powerful force that had propelled Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to national stardom, now stood fractured into two bitter camps. On one side were the loyalists, staunch defenders of AOC, who dismissed the expose as nothing more than a capitalist conspiracy designed to fracture and weaken the movement. They framed Jasmine Crockett's accusations as betrayal, painting her as a pawn in a shadowy game orchestrated by corporate interests desperate to snuff out genuine change. Their rallies turned into echo chambers of defiance, with chants of "Stay strong, AOC," reverberating through social media and grassroots meetings. But on the other side, a growing faction demanded accountability and transparency, refusing to ignore the glaring contradictions laid bare by the leaked documents. This group, driven by a mix of disillusionment and pragmatism, called for a thorough investigation, not out of malice, but out of a desperate hope to cleanse the movement of corruption before it crumbled completely. Meetings once marked by optimism became arenas of suspicion, heated debates replacing collaborative strategy sessions. The atmosphere thickened with distrust, each side accusing the other of undermining the true progressive cause. What was meant to be a shared vision of justice and equity now felt like a battlefield where allies had turned into adversaries. The fallout wasn't confined to whispered arguments behind closed doors. The Democratic Party's machinery ground to a near halt. Key conferences were abruptly canceled, party leaders called off critical caucuses, and the once bustling corridors of Capitol Hill grew eerily silent, save for hushed conversations punctuated by sharp sighs. Candidates running for offices in swing states felt the tremors most acutely. Their carefully crafted platforms and campaign promises were met with skepticism by voters who no longer trusted the party to represent their interests honestly. Poll numbers dipped sharply in crucial districts, and local party organizers struggled to rally volunteers and donors who were growing weary of the seemingly endless infighting. The internal civil war morphed into a cold, bitter paralysis. The energy that had once fueled bold legislative pushes and sweeping reforms dissipated, replaced by a pervasive fear of further scandal and collapse. Journalists chronicled the crisis in real time, with headlines like "Democrats in disarray" and "Party on the brink of breakdown" splashed across front pages. Social media was ablaze with viral threads dissecting every speech, every tweet, every leaked memo. Each new detail further fracturing public perception and deepening the divide within the party. The once celebrated narrative of progressivism as a rising force was now clouded by infighting, betrayal, and uncertainty. In the eye of this storm stood Jasmine Crockett, herself under immense pressure and scrutiny. Critics from both camps questioned her motives. Was she a principled reformer or a political opportunist? The justice she sought seemed elusive as waves of backlash threatened to engulf her. Yet beneath the chaos, Crockett remained resolute. She understood that the path to true change was never smooth, that fighting corruption often meant fighting former allies, and that the burden of integrity sometimes isolated those who carried it. The injustice she faced wasn't just personal, it was systemic, a reflection of how power resists disruption at every turn. Despite the swirling uncertainty, Crockett's voice grew louder, calling for unity not based on blind loyalty, but on shared values and uncompromising truth. "We cannot rebuild on foundations of deceit," she declared at a small, impromptu rally in Texas. "If we are to move forward, it must be with courage, transparency, and a relentless commitment to those we serve, not to those who fund us." Her words, raw and unfiltered, struck a chord with many disillusioned voters hungry for authentic leadership. But as the party fractured, the stakes grew higher. The looming midterm elections threatened to become a referendum on the Democratic Party's survival itself. Would the fractures deepen and spell defeat? Or could this crucible forge a new, stronger coalition? The battle lines were drawn, the players set, and the nation watched as a once mighty party struggled to reclaim its soul from within. In the shadows, unseen forces moved, ready to exploit every weakness. This was not just a political crisis. It was a war for the future of American democracy, and the outcome was anything but certain. The clock on the Capitol wall ticked past 2 a.m., the chamber shrouded in silence, except for the faint hum of the city's distant heartbeat. In a small, dimly lit conference room far from the glaring spotlight of media and aides, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jasmine Crockett faced each other across a scarred wooden table. No cameras, no advisors, no filters, just two warriors caught in a political storm far bigger than themselves. The tension was thick enough to suffocate. AOC broke the silence, her voice low but steady, carrying the weight of unspoken battles. "If I'm wrong, I'll resign, but you know as well as I do, we're all pawns in this game." Her eyes, fierce yet tired, searched Crockett's face for a trace of allegiance or weakness. Crockett's reply was colder than the night air creeping through the cracked window. "The difference is, I know when to pull my hand off the board." Her tone wasn't just defiance. It was a declaration of control, a refusal to be manipulated by a system rigged to consume idealists. For a moment, silence reclaimed the room. Then, with a deliberate motion, AOC reached into her pocket and produced a USB drive, sliding it slowly across the table like a loaded weapon. "Only one of us holds the keys to bring this whole system crashing down." Her words hung heavy in the air, a deadly promise wrapped in ambiguity. Every glance, every breath in that room carried the weight of a high-stakes thriller. an underground duel between two titans of progress fighting for survival and supremacy. The irony was brutal. These two women, once allies united by dreams of justice, now found themselves on opposite sides of a chessboard stained with betrayal and sacrifice. AOC's admission revealed her inner conflict, caught between the idealistic public persona and the grim realities of political survival. Crockett, the pragmatic fighter from neighborhoods marked by hardship and resilience, embodied a different kind of courage, one forged in fire and tempered by harsh truths. Neither spoke of the media frenzy or the scandals swirling around them, but the ghosts of public expectations and private compromises lingered in every wordless pause. The USB drive symbolized more than data. It was leverage, a weapon that could topple careers and dismantle alliances. It represented the fragile balance between power and vulnerability, truth and deception. As the night deepened, so did their unspoken understanding. This was not merely a confrontation between two women, but a brutal reckoning with a corrupt system that thrived on their division. The conversation simmered with unsaid threats and fragile truces. AOC's gaze hardened, hinting at the toll of carrying secrets that could ignite a political apocalypse. Crockett's steely resolve reflected a readiness to expose the rot, even if it meant burning bridges and risking everything. The room, cloaked in shadows, became a silent witness to the clash of ambition and conscience, where trust was a scarce currency and every move counted. They were trapped in a game with no clear winners, where sacrifice was inevitable and survival uncertain. In those early hours, beneath the cold fluorescent lights and behind closed doors, the fate of a movement, and perhaps a nation, hung in the balance. Two women, fierce and unyielding, weighed their choices, knowing that whichever path they chose would alter the course of history. The stakes had never been higher, and the game was far from over. The grand chamber of the House Ethics Committee buzzed with an electric tension, cameras flashing and murmurs rippling through the crowd like a gathering storm. The weight of the moment was palpable. This was no ordinary hearing. It was a historic confrontation, a reckoning that had gripped the nation's fractured political soul. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood alone at the witness table, under the relentless glare of congressional lights, the faces of lawmakers watching her with a mix of suspicion, curiosity, and thinly veiled hostility. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and the charged silence of those waiting to pounce. AOC's eyes burned with a fierce clarity, ready to shatter illusions and challenge the very foundation of power. With measured calm, she began by acknowledging her attendance at Davos, a fact that had ignited a firestorm of betrayal and cynicism. But she did not stop there. Drawing a series of emails from a meticulously prepared folder, she exposed a secret that would reverberate through the corridors of power. Dozens of legislators, from both parties, including top leaders, had engaged in the same covert agreements with corporate giants. The room shifted uncomfortably. The carefully constructed walls of political decorum trembled as the truth seeped through cracks of silence and denial. Her evidence was irrefutable, clear and undeniable proof that the rot was systemic, not isolated. Her voice grew sharper, cutting through the pretense like a blade. Yes, I have made compromises. Yes, some may call me a hypocrite. The words landed like thunder, echoing through the chamber, silencing even the most vocal detractors. Then, with a defiant pause that held the room captive, she delivered the line that would sear into history. But at least I am not one of the silent puppets sitting around me, mouthing scripted words while turning a blind eye to injustice. The statement was a seismic shock, a blistering indictment not just of herself, but of an entire political class shackled by fear and convenience. A sudden hush fell over the house. The usual clatter of papers, the whispered side conversations, even the coughs and shuffles faded into an eerie stillness. Lawmakers sat frozen, their faces masks of stunned disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement. Cameras continued to flash, capturing the raw moment where political theater gave way to brutal reality. Behind the facade of bipartisan decorum, the cracks in the system were laid bare, revealing the fragility of trust and the depth of betrayal. The testimony revealed more than scandal. It exposed the unfair battlefield on which AOC had fought. She was a lightning rod, targeted not merely for her actions, but for daring to speak truth in a world that preferred silence. The injustice was stark. While many hid behind platitudes and power plays, she stood exposed, vulnerable yet unyielding. This was the ultimate test of her resilience, a crucible that could either break her or burn her brighter than ever before. Throughout the hearing, the narrative twisted and turned like a taut thriller, every revelation another blow to the heart of the establishment. The audience, both in the chamber and across the nation, watched as a political drama unfolded with the intensity of a high-stakes courtroom battle. The lines between villain and victim blurred, leaving only raw human struggle for integrity amid a sea of compromise. For AOC, this was no mere political performance. It was a fight for survival, identity, and the soul of a movement that hung by a thread. As the hearing drew to a close, the chamber remained suspended in a charged silence, the echoes of her words still ringing in every corner. The once unassailable facade of power was now cracked, vulnerable to the rising tide of accountability. The stage was set for a new chapter in the unfolding saga, a story of courage, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of justice that left everyone watching breathless, as if caught in the climax of a relentless, edge-of-your-seat thriller. The marble steps of the Capitol gleamed cold under the harsh midday sun as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez emerged, her figure framed by the swarm of flashing cameras and a sea of reporters jostling for a word. Yet despite the chaos, not a single question pierced the tense silence surrounding her. The usual barrage of shouted queries was replaced by an eerie stillness, as if the nation itself held its breath. Waiting, watching, but unwilling to confront the storm she had just unleashed. Her face was unreadable, a mask forged from fire and ice, revealing nothing but the steely resolve of a woman who had just weathered the political earthquake of a lifetime. The weight of betrayal, the bitter sting of injustice, none of it diminished her will. She moved forward, a lone figure walking through the eye of a hurricane, where every step echoed with the thunder of a shattered status quo. Meanwhile, miles away, Jasmine Crockett stood behind a stark podium, flanked by a coalition of rising stars. Young leaders with sharp eyes, civil rights lawyers with unwavering conviction, and social activists whose passion burned hotter than ever. The room buzzed with the electric promise of revolution as she announced the birth of the Pragmatic Justice Party, a bold break from the old guard, a declaration that the old system was fractured beyond repair. Her voice rang clear and uncompromising, slicing through the din of political fatigue. We will no longer be shackled by corruption or silence. This is our call to rebuild, to reclaim, to rise. The crowd erupted in applause, a thunderous roar of hope and defiance that rattled the foundations of a party now divided and weakened. The pragmatic vision she championed was both a challenge and a beacon, one that threatened to redraw the maps of power with unforgiving clarity. But beneath the headlines and the spectacle, an unsettling question lingered, haunting the shadows like a ghost. In a world where every move is tracked, every whisper dissected, and every alliance forged or broken under the spotlight, who among them truly walks untainted? The cameras captured smiles, the speeches spilled fire. Yet behind the carefully constructed facades, was it all just a high-stakes game? A complex chessboard where pawns and kings alike are manipulated by unseen hands? The bitter irony was undeniable. The quest for purity, for justice, for change seemed trapped in a labyrinth of duplicity and betrayal. The very systems designed to protect the people had become instruments of their silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city that never sleeps, the story remained unresolved, a simmering tension between reform and ruin. Would the bold fractures tear the nation apart, or would they pave the way for a new dawn? The lines were blurred, the players weary but unbowed, and the stakes higher than ever. In the end, the game was far from over. And as the world watched, caught in the grip of an unfolding drama, one truth stood stark and unyielding. In this relentless battle for the soul of democracy, the question was no longer who would win or lose, but whether anyone could survive the cost of the fight itself. As the dust settled on the political battlefield, and the echoes of clashing ideals faded into uneasy silence, a deeper reflection emerged, a call to confront the brutal truths buried beneath the spectacle. Jasmine Crockett and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were not merely warriors locked in a ruthless duel for power. They were symbols caught in the merciless grip of a system designed to crush conviction beneath layers of deception. The injustice they faced was not simply political, it was profoundly personal. They fought not only against rivals, but against an unseen architecture of influence and control that distorted truth and weaponized trust. The weight of this betrayal pressed down on them, shaping every move, every word, and every decision with crushing intensity. In this high-stakes drama, the line between hero and villain blurred into a shadowy haze. Crockett, the relentless crusader demanding accountability, bore the burden of exposing the rot at tremendous personal cost. Every call for transparency painted a target on her back, whispers of ambition cloaked in accusations of betrayal. Meanwhile, AOC, caught in a whirlwind of conflicting loyalties, grappled with the bitter irony of fighting for change, while shackled by alliances that threatened to suffocate her ideals. Her own compromises became ammunition against her, turning former allies into adversaries and eroding the very foundation of the movement she had ignited. The scandal was more than headlines. It was a fracture in the collective conscience, a raw wound in the heart of democracy. This story is not a fairy tale of good versus evil. It's a relentless, adrenaline-fueled saga where every step forward feels like a fight through quicksand. It reveals the tragic paradox of leadership in a world where power often demands sacrifice, not just of morals, but of identity. For every truth told, a dozen lies lingered in the shadows. For every victory, 1,000 defeats whispered in the dark. The public watched, riveted yet disillusioned, as ideals clashed with reality in a game where the rules were always changing and the stakes could not be higher. Yet, within this chaos, the human spirit flickered stubbornly, a beacon of hope amidst the storm. The lessons here reach far beyond the confines of politics. They touch on the very essence of humanity's struggle for justice and integrity in an imperfect world. They ask us to consider how easily ambition and fear can warp even the purest intentions, and how systems built for protection can become prisons of complicity. They compel us to face the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the greatest enemies are not our opponents, but the invisible forces that manipulate us all. Crockett and AOC's story forces us to question not only their choices but our own. How do we hold on to truth when surrounded by lies? How do we remain steadfast when the very foundations we rely on are crumbling? Yet amid this turmoil, it is vital to remember that no single narrative can capture the full complexity of these battles. Every perspective holds fragments of truth, and every accusation carries the weight of pain and desperation. This is a story of human beings caught in extraordinary circumstances, flawed, determined, and often misunderstood. Their struggles mirror those faced by countless individuals who fight against injustice in ways both visible and unseen. It is a reminder that the pursuit of justice is rarely neat or linear, but messy, painful, and fraught with sacrifice. So as we watch this saga unfold, let us do so with both eyes open, recognizing the courage it takes to challenge entrenched power while acknowledging the perilous terrain of that fight. Let us honor the complexity of those who stand in the crossfire and resist the urge to reduce them to caricatures of good or evil. In a world where every action ripples through the fabric of society, the story of Crockett and AOC is a cautionary tale and a call to vigilance. It urges us to demand transparency not only from our leaders, but from ourselves, to recognize the cost of silence, and to never lose sight of the human spirit that strives for something better, even when the odds are overwhelming. Ultimately, this narrative is an invitation, a challenge to all who witness it, to reflect deeply on the nature of justice, power, and truth. It is a reminder that in the theater of politics and life, the players are human, the stakes are real, and the outcome is never certain. As you turn the page, remember this: no story is without its shadows, and no victory comes without its scars. In the end, the most important question is not who wins or loses, but how we choose to play the game, and whether we have the courage to rewrite the rules when the old ones no longer serve us. This story weaves threads of power, betrayal, and idealism, themes echoed in many real lives and struggles. Yet it is ultimately a crafted narrative, a mirror reflecting shadows rather than literal truths. Any parallels to actual people or events are subtle whispers of coincidence, meant only to deepen the drama unfolding here. From the shadows of deceit and fractured alliances, a clarion call rises, raw, urgent, impossible to ignore. The battlefield is no longer just in closed-door meetings or whispered scandals. It's in every street, every voice demanding justice, transparency, and a reckoning for those who manipulate the system from behind the curtain. Jasmine Crockett, battered yet unbroken, stands not only as a symbol of resistance, but as a beacon lighting the path toward accountability. The weight of betrayal and the sting of hypocrisy have fueled her fire, sharpening her resolve to tear down the walls built by corruption and false promises. Her words cut through the silence like a blade. We cannot stand idly by while our people are sold out to the highest bidder. This is more than politics. This is a fight for the soul of our democracy. The injustice she faces isn't just personal. It echoes the struggle of millions whose voices have been muted, their hopes pawned in the name of power. This is the moment where complacency dies, where citizens awaken from apathy and recognize that the rot beneath the surface threatens them all. It's a call to action that demands courage, demanding everyone who dares to dream of change to rise from the shadows and confront the darkness head-on. But this fight is not for the faint-hearted. It's a relentless storm, a high-stakes game where every move is scrutinized, every ally is tested, and every truth uncovered risks tearing the fragile fabric of a nation already stretched thin. The system wants to silence the whistleblowers, to drown the cries of those like Crockett who refuse to bow. Yet the growing chorus of voices, activists, everyday citizens, and even disillusioned insiders, signals that the tide is turning. The air crackles with tension, a brewing revolution of conscience fueled by the bitter taste of betrayal and the fiery hunger for justice. This is the hour where action must transcend words. Protests must flood streets, demands must shake halls of power, and the spotlight must remain unforgiving on those who wield influence like weapons. The injustice done to Crockett, and by extension to all who seek truth, is a call for relentless vigilance, a challenge to dismantle the very structures that perpetuate inequality and deceit. Each heartbeat, each step forward, each raised fist is a defiant stand against a system rigged to protect the few at the expense of the many. In the swirling chaos of scandal and political warfare, the choice is clear. Will we be silent spectators, or will we rise as warriors for justice? The stage is set, the players are revealed, and the future hangs in the balance. The question is no longer about who will fall, but who will stand, and what kind of world we will fight to build in the ashes of the old. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.